Anamam Bhagavata Vadyam Durveniyopi Dehinam Yanam Tvam Manase Yukta Jnatah, known, Aham, myself, Bhavata, by you, tu, but, Adva, Adya, today, Dukh, difficult, Vijnaya, to be known, Api, in spite of, Dehinam, for the conditioned soul, Yat, because, Mam, me, Tvam, you, Manyase, understand, Ayuktam, without being made of, Bhuta, material elements, Indriya, material senses, Guna, material modes, Atmabhi, the false ego like the conditioned soul. Translation. Although I'm not easily knowledgeable by the conditioned soul, you have known me today because you know that my personality is not constituted of anything material, and specifically not of the 5 gross and 3 subtle elements. Purport. By Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Knowledge of the Supreme Absolute Truth does not necessitate negation of the material manifestation, but understanding of spiritual existence as it is. To think that because material existence is realized in forms, therefore spiritual existence must be formless is only a negative material conception of spirit. The real spiritual conception is that spiritual form is not material form. Brahma appreciated the eternal form of the Lord in that way, and the personality of Godhead approved of Brahma's spiritual conception. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna condemned the material conception of his body, a conception that arises because he is apparently present like a man. The Lord may appear in any of his many spiritual forms, but he is not materially composed, nor has he any difference between body and self. That is the way of conceiving the spiritual form of the Lord. Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishna Bhatale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamine. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanabhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So this is a very important verse, just like any other verses and purports that Prabhupada left for us. Because it actually discussing the fundamental truth of our philosophy. And Srila Prabhupada in his purport, he mentions 2 main ideas. And the first one is that Krishna's body is not material, that he is not just an ordinary person. And we know that Krishna's body is Satchitananda, full of eternity, bliss and knowledge. And it is stated in purport that only fools, Krishna actually condemned them, and he said that only fools think of me as an ordinary man. And the second idea is that fact that Krishna doesn't have material body doesn't mean that he doesn't have any form. So it doesn't mean that he's formless, like impersonalists claim oftentimes, and they say that Krishna that God accepted material form just out of mercy for us, so that we can become, through that form, become God ourselves. That's the impersonalist idea. So these 2 fundamental topics, very important for us to understand and discuss, and we know how much Prabhupada in his purports often talks about and fights the impersonalists. And so in this purport, Srila Prabhupada, referring to Bhagavad Gita chapter 9, verse 11, it goes like that. Avajainanti mam mudham manusim tanum ashritam parambhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. Fools derive me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord of all that be. So that 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, 9th and 10th chapter, considering to be like an essence of Bhagavad Gita. So they're hidden in the middle of the book. And that's where Krishna doesn't talk about karma or yoga anymore, or any other yoga ladders or any other paths. He's actually talking about unalloyed devotional service, which is free of karma and yoga. And when we just do something for Krishna because we want to please him without any personal motivations, which is a very high elevated level. And it's interesting that the beginning of that chapter where Krishna started to talk about the essence of unalloyed bhakti, he actually starts describing his potencies, his various energies. And he describes how easy it is for him to maintain this material world, or just any universes, because material world is only like 1/4 of Krishna's creation. And so the example that sometimes is given is like when we walk, sometimes we have a little bug crawling on our body and we don't even notice. So it's not difficult for us to move the ant on our body because we just walk and we just drag him with us. Because we have so much power in our body that the little ant, we don't even notice him. So in the same way, for Krishna to maintain this universe and everything that's going on, all the energies, it's really very easy. And more than that, it's in those verses, Krishna also describes that he's not just maintainer and creator of everything, but he's also aloof from it, which is a very important point. And the example that he uses is of the sky. You know how the sky, it has clouds and stars and everything in there, and it rests in sky, but sky is completely aloof from it. So, and it's an interesting point because there is it's like universal law, the way the material, like the way the world was designed. Then as soon as we look after someone or someone is looking after us, we develop attachment to that person. It's a very natural thing that doesn't only happen between parents and kids, although it is one of those really obvious examples. But even if we try to look after someone like newcoming devotees, for example, and after some times when we're trying to help them and give them advice, we start to feel that we belong with that person. So it's a natural way how the world been designed, but it doesn't work like that for Krishna. Even though he's looking after everyone, but he stay aloof. He's neutral. He's impartial. So that's one of those inconceivable potencies that Krishna has. So it is very important to understand that God is great. This is why Krishna talks about it in the beginning of that 9th chapter that describes devotional service, because unless we understand that God is great, we would think that he's just not really different from us. And that's how, people become sahajiyas, because they look at his pastimes and they think, oh, what's the big deal? He's just dancing there with girls. He's just same like me, lusty, and he's just, abusing his power because he can do whatever he wants. But actually, Krishna is different, because he's great. And it is very important first principle that we have to understand. Not long ago, I was reading with my kids, the Krishna book, just before they went to sleep, and they picked the story themselves. And the story was about how Krishna's grandchild was getting married. Aniruddha was getting married with, I can't remember the name of, yes, that's right. And so they went to that wedding, and Lord Balaram was playing chess game with Rukmi. And so there was like a description there how Rukmi was keep assaulting Balaram and saying that, oh no, he didn't actually won the game. You know, if you could look at him, he's just a cover boy. He does not know how to do anything. And so he assaulted him once and second time and third time. And then after some time, Lord Balaram got really angry and he just gets his club and he just smashes and the legs flying and everyone is dead. And you're reading that to a child, you know? You're like thinking, you know, we're trying to bring them those values that when something doesn't go your way, violence is not an answer. You know, we're trying to teach them those things, and then you read about Krishna. And then they proceeded with wedding after that, you know, and I'm like sitting there thinking, oh my God, I'm reading that for my children. And that is why it is so important to explain that God is great. So, you know, so then we have to discuss it that, you know, we as usual human beings, we're trying to be compassionate and we're trying to, but for Krishna, whatever he does is ultimately good, you know, because he's absolute. So when he punishes or when he's rewarding, everyone gets benefits. And so we had to explain this to children that, you know, when Krishna kills demons, but they get liberated, you know, and the devotees are happy because demons not harassing them anymore. And so this is the point when we explain that God is great. This is the difference, you know, that yes, when we get into these difficult situations, then we're trying to be tolerant, we're trying to be good, you know, behave ourselves. But when Krishna is different. So, and that's why when we have, for example, deity worship, we know that there is so many rules and regulations in there. When we go to altar, we always have to have really clean clothes. Everything has to be done in proper time. So there's that mood of Aishwarya. It's very important because it helps us to understand, for our conditioned mind, to understand that it is not just simply something, you know, this God is great. And I had that one experience once. There was a last royal wedding. I think it was Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. They were getting married a few years ago. And I was always thinking, oh, what's the big deal about royal family? You know, it's just people who happen to be royals or whatever. I don't know. I didn't think much of it, but everyone was talking about it. And we were doing Harinam that night in Surface Paradise. We were just sitting in one spot and singing. And the bar opposite us, they had like a big screens. They had this wedding happening. Everyone were watching. And so while we were sitting there, occasionally I would see, you know, and I was just sitting thinking, what's the big deal? But it's interesting that later on you read the description of the wedding and you read how they write that, you know, George Clooney arrived at 3:33, you know, and he come out. And then Julia Roberts arrived 2 minutes later. And you start reading in it how precise everything was planned. And you kind of start to feel that feeling. It's like, okay, well, they not as simple people. Okay, I get it now. So in this way, we start to understand. So when we're worshiping deities, for example, yeah, we have all these rules. We have to bow down. We have to have clean clothes. Everything has to be done in proper time. I remember there was a pujari in Vrindavan who once was late for his puja, and they took him off the roster forever. So he kind of lost that service. So that all help us to understand that Krishna is great, you know, that it's not something just simple like that. And even though it is absolutely impossible to understand how great Krishna and understand all his energies, because our brain is, you know, it's very limited, and we live in the smallest planet, you know, just like in Australia, the teeny tiny thing. So how can we possibly understand all the energies of Krishna and how great he is? But never, even though we can't understand fully, but we still should make an attempt, because you know the Kartik month is coming, and we need two things: we need Krishna's mercy and we need our efforts, you know. And that's why Krishna starts that 9th chapter from describing his potencies, and then he comes to this verse that we just read, that fools derive him, and they think that they don't know my transcendental nature, and they just, yeah. So when Krishna says this verse, he explains why people do not surrender to him. Yeah, because they don't understand, and they think of him just as an ordinary human being. And why is it sometimes so difficult to understand the greatness of God also, and to see him that he's not just an ordinary human being. And in the beginning of the chapter, just like the first few verses, Krishna tells Arjuna that I'm going to tell you this knowledge, the most confidential knowledge, because you're not envious of me. Yeah, so not envious, that is the qualification that Arjuna had, so that he could understand that knowledge. And why is it so important not to be envious? Because we know that when we're envious to someone, we're always looking for faults in that person. So it doesn't matter how well the person does something. We can't sleep unless we find something. Okay, he made a beautiful feast and it seems like it's better than I can cook, but those samosas, the samosas were, something was wrong with them. The shape was weird, or there was not enough salt, and we're like, okay, so now I can sleep in peace. It's, I don't know, at least maybe I can speak from myself, so we find those faults when we feel that, oh, someone is better than me, and it's burning, and it's, and so when we have that kind of consciousness, then we can't appreciate Krishna's position. We can't appreciate his greatness, and we don't have enough faith. So in this way, we can't surrender to Krishna if we have this mentality. So the more envy we have in our heart, the less we can actually surrender to Krishna, and less we can see him as a person, as a not ordinary person. And one second. So how could we actually understand that I'm envious of God? Because it's easy sometimes to say, okay, I'm envious of such and such, but Krishna, we can't accept that he's God, and he's the great. And sometimes we say, I love Krishna, and how can you say that I'm envious of him so much? But we can practically see it in our life when we interact with others, because sometimes a situation happens and we want to be the ones who controlling. If someone done something wrong to us, or being not nice to us, we want to be the ones who are going to bring the punishment. We want to be the one who bring the person to the justice. We want to be the one who is Krishna, basically. We know that sometimes situation happens and we take Krishna out of it and we say, oh, such and such did this to me and I have to show him his place or her place, But in this moment, we take Krishna out of situation because it's actually his place. Our place is work on ourselves and trying to understand why a certain situation brings me so much distress, why this happened to me. But the other person, this is up to Krishna to decide how he's going to deal with him and when he's going to do it. Sometimes we see people doing nasty things and they get away with it, but they don't. Krishna is just waiting for the proper moment when person is ready to get the reactions, But when we just have this propensity and we're trying to take Krishna's place, this is us being envious to him. Or sometimes when we just envious to anyone, just because someone is better than us, this is ultimately envious to Krishna because Krishna is so much better than us. This is not having that humility of accepting my position, And so in this way, we can see that even though we might not necessarily feeling it towards Krishna that we are envious, but we see it manifested through our life, through our everyday activities that, yes, we're trying to take Krishna's place all the time, trying to be the best, better than everyone else. Like Prabhupada often writes in his purports that the real qualification that we know that devotees advanced when we stop feeling envy, when someone is doing really good progress and we're feeling really happy for them, genuinely, that's how we know that, we're getting rid of that envy slowly. So in this way, because we have that envy in our heart, we know how Prabhupada just described in this purport that Krishna comes in many different forms. So in Kali Yuga, Krishna comes and present in a form of holy name, and he's present here in a form of deities, and Krishna present in the form of prasadam and Bhagavatam and our spiritual master. We know that when we have a real sincere desire to become Krishna conscious, then Krishna sends a spiritual master. That's his blessing. And spiritual master doesn't make mistakes. That's even though we understand that no one is perfect because we are in the material world, but your spiritual master is that transparent medium, so that Krishna talks to you through your spiritual master. So spiritual master doesn't make mistakes. So he is not an ordinary person. And then we have devotees around us who also have Krishna in their heart as Paramatma. And Krishna often talks to us through his devotees. But because we have this not pure heart yet, so then we see at deities and we understand to degree that it is Krishna there, depending on how much we can surrender, depending on our level. But sometimes we look at deities and we just see dolls, just the marble, beautiful dolls. Or we chant Hare Krishna, but it's just a sound that is very difficult to produce for 2 hours every day. We don't understand that this is a Krishna's personality. It's not an ordinary sound. This is something, in this way, we don't see Krishna as, we see him as ordinary. And there is really beautiful quotes about deities that I just was going to share. The Prabhupada writes about deities in temple. That's from Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 6, Chapter 2, verse 41. If one worship the deity in temple, one's mind will naturally be absorbed in thought of the Lord and his form. There is no distinction between the form of the Lord and the Lord himself. Therefore, Bhakti Yoga is the most easy system of yoga. Yogis try to concentrate their minds upon the form of the Supersoul, Vishnu, within the heart. But this same objective is easily achieved when one's mind is absorbed in deity worshipped in the temple. In every temple, there is a transcendental form of the Lord, and one may easily think of this form. By seeing the Lord during arati, by offering bhoga, and by constantly thinking of the form of the deity, one becomes first-class yogi. And then another one is from Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th Canto. The Lord's incarnation is Archa Avatara, the deity form, is a special manifestation of the Lord's mercy towards the materialistic or neophyte devotees who are still under the influence of material designations. They are unable to perceive the Lord in his eternal abode, and therefore the Lord descends in the deity form. This facility is offered to neophyte devotees so that they can see the real form of the Lord face to face and offer their respectful obeisances and sacrifices in the form of archa. Through such facilities, the neophyte gradually invoke their original Krishna consciousness. Deity worship in the form of temple worship is the most valuable benediction given by the Lord to beginners. All neophytes must therefore engage in the worship of the Lord by keeping the Archa Vigraha at home or in the temple. So that's just beautiful quotations. So what can we do? That's the situation that sometimes we don't feel taste when we chant our japa, or we look at deities and we see, but we not always see them, that they're alive. We don't always have this consciousness like that. We struggle with devotees sometimes. So it is not something that can be done artificially when we just say that God is great and we just understand it, although it is also part of the process. And in that chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that knowledge has to become realized. So the difference between book knowledge and the knowledge that we realize is when we have to live through it. We have to apply it in practice and go through all ups and downs. And, and when we live through it, then that knowledge becomes realized. So that realization comes through practice of sadhana bhakti. When we just follow the rules and regulations, when we practice our devotional service under guidance of spiritual master. And that's when we come to this, coming back to the purport that we were reading, to that second idea that Prabhupada was talking about, that Krishna has a form, that Krishna is a person. So the first we were discussing that Krishna is not an ordinary material person. Yes, and now we're coming to the point that Krishna actually a person, that he has a form. Because in order for us to practice our sadhana bhakti and to clean our heart, we have to be engaged in relationship with a person, you know. And in introduction to Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada writes this, like one of the first paragraphs. He writes that in these days, human society is so progressive. You know, we have all the science, we have all the economical development. We can basically, you know, like the yogis, they have their mystic powers. So all this already been kind of achieved by material science, you know, because we can travel by planes, we can access anything we want through internet, just sitting from home, you know. But Srila Prabhupada writes that there is a need for a clue as how humanity can become one in peace, friendship, and prosperity with a common cause. Because we can see that there is so much conflict in the world. You know, there is all the racism, you know, nationalism, the human rights, and people trying to fight for it to, you know, they're trying to solve these problems by material means, and it's become more and more ridiculous, you know, the way they solve it. And in my university, we've been discussing racism, and my professor was saying that, yes, there's all these things we put in place now, the politically correct way of addressing people and everything, but the reality is that it's just changing shape. There is still racism. People just learn to, you know, show it in a different way, or don't say certain things that are not applicable. But sometimes when we say that Krishna consciousness is the answer for everything, it seems impractical. Some people, you know, we just seem like, okay, well, this is just like a band-aid we put everywhere. But it is actually very practical, because if you take every single issue and conflict we have in the world and trying to solve it, you come to that end every single time, you know, because for the first thing, you don't even know what's actually going on there. You know, you have all these conspiracy theories about what's happening in the world, but you're never going to know the truth, because that's not our position to know. We're just little people in Murgalumba, you know. How we're going to know what's happening, really? So, and that's why the only one way of understanding and solving racism is that we know that we're all spirit souls, you know, and that from position of Krishna consciousness, we're all equal, because we have our unique relationships with Krishna. And so that's why Prabhupada's saying here that the only way to bring peace into the world and stop all the conflicts and wars and everything that's going on is only when people become Krishna conscious. But this is only possible if we accept that Krishna is person, because it is impossible to build a relationship with someone who is impersonal, you know, because what happens, how can we solve those conflicts, is when Krishna knows and he manages to take into account everyone's interests. And we've seen those stories all through Mahabharata and Srimad Bhagavatam, when devotees would be stuck in really difficult situation, when there is so many different people and you don't know what to do, and there is all these Vedic injunctions and everything. And Krishna always finds a way to make everyone happy so that everyone gets what they're supposed to get. Because Krishna is person, you know, he's not just some random idea of some energy there. And I think that one of those really perfect examples that illustrates what we were talking about here today is the story of Sakshi Gopal. I'm not sure if everyone knows the story. No? Okay, so I'm just going to be really short with that one. I'll just quickly cover the main points. So there was an older Brahmana who went on pilgrimage, and as he was going through his pilgrimage, he met a younger Brahmana who was there with him, and he was serving to him all the time and making sure that he's comfortable and everything. And so by the end of their pilgrimage, the older Brahmana, he was just so grateful. Then he wanted to give that younger Brahmana his daughter in marriage. And so he's like, when we come back, you please marry my daughter. And then the younger Brahmana was like, oh, you know, I'm so like poor, and you know, you probably don't want to do this, and you'll, you know. So, but Brahmana was, no, I really want to do this. And so the younger Brahmana asked him to promise him that in front of Sakshi Gopal deity. There was a deity of Gopal there, so he would be a witness. And so that's what they did. And then the story goes that the Brahmin come back home and he tells his family what happened, that he's going to give his daughter in the marriage. And he's, yeah, no way, why should we give a beautiful daughter into like family of this young Brahmana who is even here, So he was just really against it. And all the family went really against it and they didn't want to do it. And so when the young Brahmana came, then all the Brahmana couldn't do it because all his family was like, no, we're not doing it. And so that's when younger Brahmana went back to Sakshi Gopal and he asked him to come and be a witness because the older Brahmana told his son that I promise in front of deities, and he was like, pfft. So there is your example of an atheist, who's saying, oh, who cares, you gave, your vow in front of deities. Who cares, deities are not alive. Yeah, that's what we've been discussing. But the younger Brahmana, because it was a realized knowledge for him, so he went back to Sakshi Gopal deity and he asked him to come and please be my witness. And so Sakshi Gopal goes like, well, how are you expecting me to go walk? I'm a deity. And he told him, well, if you can talk, you can walk. And so the story goes that he brought the deity there. And when the eldest son saw the deity there, that was a witness and said that yes, this indeed happened, then the conflict was solved. So the atheist and the devotee, they had a conflict there. But through the personal feature of the Lord and through the younger Brahmana understanding that this is not just a doll, he understand that Krishna is not different, in this way it was able to be solved. And it is actually, even if we look just on everyday life, if we look just the recent history of Second World War, we know that people been fighting, but what were they fighting for? They were not fighting just for the land of Germany or land of Russia. The people actually loved Hitler. They were worshipping Hitler. And it was same in motherland, in Russia, because Stalin was like a father to everyone. They had no idea what he was doing. It only come out like years later. So, and they were fighting because it was personal for them. Russians were fighting so hard and ultimately won the war because it was personal for them. Someone was taking away their land. And why is that land important? Because that's where my family is. That's where my, everything. It's personal. So when we talk about something impersonal, it's utopic. And we see even these days, when someone is trying to become a president, they always make those campaigns. They talk about their personal life, how they went, their personalities. They went and meet someone with school, because they know that people get attached to a person, not just some concept. So it is very important that Krishna is a person. He's not just some energy or and that is the fundamental principle of our movement that Prabhupada was fighting so much with impersonalists about it. And even if we look at it from just philosophical point of view, we were discussing envy. Envy and lust is a core reason why we're here in the material world that binds us here. And in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains how we get rid of lust. He gives that recipe. He says that lust always present in our senses, in our mind, in our intelligence. It's everywhere. So where do we attack it first? And Krishna says you control your senses, you follow rules and regulations, and then you have to make your intelligence strong by reading books, by associating with devotees, by taking instructions. And in this way, when mind is not agitated by senses, because they're controlled, and you have strong intelligence, then your mind can be fixed on Krishna. But this is a very important point, because unless our mind is actually fixed on Krishna, unless we're feeling some reciprocation there, some emotional attachment to Krishna, we won't be able to carry on. And we see it all the time. When one of those three things is not present, then people live Krishna consciousness, or they can't be vegetarians because, they're controlling their senses and they understand it's good, but they didn't meet Krishna there. If you just become vegan or vegetarian without Krishna consciousness in it, sometimes we see that people, they do it for years and then they give up because it's hard. So in the same way, impersonalist Brahmavadis, not Mayavadis, but Brahmavadis, they get to effulgence, but then they there is no Krishna in there is no relationship, so they can't stay there, so they fall again. So that idea that God is not person, it's, and that idea that we can just merge into Brahman and be happy there, it's an utopic idea, it doesn't work like that, because Krishna is a person. And so in this way, when we so when we follow the process of sadhana bhakti and we're trying to understand that, and remember that Krishna is present everywhere through our holy name, through devotees around us, in this way we can remember Krishna always, because that's the ultimate rule of sadhana bhakti. Always remember Krishna, never forget him. And so when we practice in this way, then we achieve our goal that we always remember Krishna, because he is everywhere. So the more we practice, the more we purify our heart from envy, the more we're able to look at form of Krishna and see that he's actually real. And just last thing I wanted to mention, it was an experience that my dad once shared with me. He came to, back then Guru Maharaj lived in New Zealand, and he went to serve to him there, and he stayed with Guru Maharaj. I think it was 1 month, and Guru Maharaj told him to change his ticket. So it was like 2 months, and all my dad was doing is just like cleaning. He's like, I was like a housewife, just doing, all the things around house, just cleaning dishes, doing the bedding, all this. And Guru Maharaj was like very strict with him to go into all Mangal Aritis and everything. So he would not let me sleep for a second. He was just like really strict. And then he was sharing that after this process of sadhana like this, one day he's like, I got into temple room and offered my obeisances, and I looked at deities, and I can see that Krishna is alive. I'm just looking at him, and I can see that the deity standing there is actually alive. Yeah. So it was, and then he went back home, and as we know, family life, we get caught up in all sorts of things, and eventually that disappeared, that feeling. But it is definitely there when we practice in a proper way. Then we're able to eventually, by process of sadhana in the right way, we start to develop this relationship with Krishna, that emotional attachment to him, and understand that it is not just a doll. Yeah. So that's all I wanted to say. If there is any comments or questions. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you everyone for your attention. Hare Krishna.